June 17th, 2025 Planning and Zoning Work Session to order at 6 p.m. Please silence your devices. In attendance are Vice Chair Hornseth, Commissioners Verhey and Sullivan. First on the agenda is staff comments. Would the staff please give us an overview?
All right, today's work session we'll do our training, which will be a general, just Title 15 overview, and then we'll turn it over to you all to continue the parking conversation.
Okay, thank you. So next on the agenda is discussions items. First is a mini training on how to navigate Title 15.
Alright, so I'll just start off with a general overview of the Seward Muni Code. So this Muni Code can be found on our community development website. I'm sure there are other places within the City of Seward webpage. Oh yeah, right there, City Code. That would be the easiest place to go, but community development, if you just scroll down, you can access the City Code right here, both of the chapters that our department and P&Z oversee, Title 15 and Title 16. So you'll see within Title 15 there are 6 different chapters. We'll go through each of these more in depth, not too in depth, don't fear. And you can toggle these arrows to open them up to see some of the subcategories through them. The category that we use a lot in our office is the Seward Zoning Code, and then the district regulations. So you'll see a lot of familiar topics here that we go through a lot: parking, development requirements, land use is allowed. So that's just a general overview there. And then within each of the sections within the chapter, this is just for some pro tips. You'll have these little buttons over here on the right corner. So if you want to print that specific section that you're looking at, parking, you can click that to print it. If you want to download in a Word, you can click this here. You can share the link. And if you click download in Word, then you'll see that you can select other sections to download in Word as well. And this is really helpful if you have a question about a certain aspect of code. You can download it into Word and bring it into our office so that we're all on the same page with what section you were looking at. Or for the commissioners, this is what we use a lot when we're proposing amendments to code. I'll download the section that we're working on into Word, and then that way we can just have that section and then tweak the various wording within that section. And then the last thing for general overview, if you look at the end here, kind of circle it with the mouse here, at the end of each section you'll have in parentheses a list of ordinances, and this list of ordinances shows each time there was an amendment made to that section. So you can go back and track the changes that have been made to that section by going into each of these ordinances to see what changes were made. And you can find these ordinances in legislative history. So on the city webpage, on any of the departments or any location within the city webpage, if you scroll to the very top, at the top header, if you click on legislative history, then you'll get into that database, and that may be a training for another day, but you can search within the legislative history for those ordinances.
Okay, and then we're just, Courtney and I are just going to kind of scroll through and highlight a few of the more important sections. Oh, sorry, got ahead of myself here. But I will say, I do enjoy anytime someone comes to our office and needs some help navigating code, because it's a learning experience for all of us. Oftentimes when I do a code review, it just gets me down a rabbit hole that opens up a whole bunch of new questions. Chair Griswold is really good at sending emails that puts me down different rabbit holes, but it helps me learn, and I appreciate it. And so we'll just kind of scroll through here. I'll hit on amendments, and so anytime these chapters or titles are changed, the ultimate decision maker is City Council, and any change in code is known as an ordinance. But when it comes to titles 15 and 16, Planning and Zoning Commission has recommendational kind of ability to recommend with amendments or not recommend certain changes. And so, and those changes can be initiated through a variety of manners. The City Council can actually, on its own motion, start the change. The Commission can do so itself. A petition of the majority of property owners in an area. And so we've had several rezones, that have come up, and a lot of people may not realize that that is actually a code change, an ordinance. And so if there's a neighborhood and the majority of the owners want to get together and rezone their neighborhood, they can go through this process by getting a majority of them to sign that petition to initiate the process. Getting signatures of 50% of the registered voters, that would be quite the task, but is an option. And I really wasn't sure how to figure out this last one, which is provided by the Home Rule Charter of the city. I kind of looked through the charter a little bit and didn't have a great answer to that one, so I might have to get back to people on that if it ever does come up. But number 2 basically is sharing that if amendment is proposed and maybe doesn't go through, you have to wait at least 9 months before that amendment or something similar to it could be considered again. And then this one is talking for those rezones that we've had. It basically tells you the parameters for that. So anything less than an acre cannot be rezoned unless it fits in with the future land use map, or the rezone would align with bordering zones within the city as well. And the procedure for any type of change, especially if it's coming from the public, an application, or sometimes it's initiated through the city, this commission will have a public hearing where that will give opportunities for members of the public to come in and weigh in on the recommendation that P&Z will make, and then they will put forward that recommendation to council. And then the process for council is any ordinance would have to be introduced at a city council meeting, which means it's just on the books, but it's not going to be discussed or talked about or voted upon, and that gives the public extra time to kind of weigh the recommendation that P&Z put through. And then when the next city council meeting comes up, that's when they will have their public hearing, and so that gives the public a second opportunity of a hearing to speak to that proposed amendment. And then the public hearing, and there's information here on those public hearings. And so the procedures, this first one's a little archaic. It talks about the newspaper of general circulation, which we do not have. The Seward Folly, it's great that we have that, but that's not really a free online newspaper. Is not considered a newspaper of general circulation. But I think the clerk's office is planning to in the future hopefully use them as an avenue for that information. And some neighboring property owners, and so if there is a change that would affect a specific area, we definitely want to make sure the public is aware, and then we make intentional efforts via our code to notify the area of town that would be maybe affected the most or nearby those changes. And so if you are within a 300-foot distance of where the change would occur, you would get something mailed out from our office no less than 10 days before the public hearing. And so that gives that area, that neighborhood, an extra opportunity to know of what's coming up, because I know it's kind of maybe difficult for everyone to kind of pay attention to all the things that are going on with the city. The public posting here, you might see these around town, so these big kind of white public notice signs. And so if there is a change in the code related to a specific area of town or a property, you'll see the notice posted, and those have to be posted as well in advance of the meetings. And so if it's a city-owned property, we'll go out and put those on there. If it's a privately owned property, we'll get the signs ready, but then it's required for the owner of the lot to place those on the property.
All right, so then next section that we'll go over is down here in the land use planning, and we'll over the land use districts. So this section, land use districts established definitions, contains all of the names of the land use districts within our zoning code and then the definition. So if you live in single-family residential zoning district or perhaps a commercial zoning district, you may wonder, what does it mean to live in this zoning district, or what does it mean to be single-family? Well, you can come here and read the definition or purpose of the single-family district or the auto commercial zoning district or urban residential, and it just gives you a general summary of what the purpose of that zoning district is. Then further down under general, so under the Seward zoning code then, sorry, over here on the left-hand side, we have our definitions right there in the very end. So the definitions can be one of the most interesting portions of this code. It's the place that I would recommend most people start if you are curious about certain land use within our code and the regulations that may pertain around it, because a lot of these definitions contain the parameters for what a land use can be and even some regulations. So for example, we'll pick a pretty common one, dwellings, and that may be one of the hard parts of navigating the definitions is layman terms for what people may think of is not necessarily the term that is used in these definitions. So, when someone's thinking of a dwelling, they're probably thinking of a home, a house. So sometimes that can be difficult, and we can definitely help with that. But so dwellings would then contain all the different types of dwellings, apartments, studios, efficiency apartments, which have now been changed to accessory apartments, condominiums, guest house, modular homes, multifamily, single family. And it's important to also know that just because a definition is here doesn't necessarily mean that it is a use that is allowed. So you're just going to the definitions to find how we define a use, and then you'll need to go down to the land use table to see if it is allowed, which we'll discuss later. And then the last definition I just want to point out for an example is the definition of a setback. So we'll scroll down. Okay, so here we are for setback. So it says the required minimum distance from the right-of-way or lot line that establishes the area within which only fencing, landscaping, driveways, parking, and similar uses are permitted. So there's that interesting regulation piece within this definition where it does allow fencing, landscaping, driveways, and parking. And then it says any structure, including but not limited to decks, stairways, porches, or other attachments to a building, are specifically prohibited in the setback. However, building eaves are permitted to extend into the setback a maximum of 2 feet. So this is just an interesting example of what kind of things may be in a definition that adds further clarification. We get a lot of questions, can a deck be built into the setback, or my porch extend into the setback? And the definition right here clearly states no, they cannot.
So, and as you go down, you'll see parking is next, and so we're going to skip over that one since that's the topic of today's work session, but the parking minimum requirements are in Title 15 as well. And then below that is the development requirements. And so this is one where we get a lot of traffic in our office from people that want to develop a home or a business, and I have questions about where they can build and what the setbacks are. And so kind of similar to up top, you do have the abbreviations for the different zoning districts that can help you navigate the table. And one kind of nice thing about the expand button is that it lets you scroll down and keep that first row up here, where if you don't, then you have to keep going back and forth up there. And so that's a kind of a fun trick that it took me too long to learn that one. But on the left here, so you got your residential, primary residential zoning districts are all grouped here, your principally commercial grouped here, and then your public ones grouped here. And then you're basically looking at, and it's a little easier to maybe use an example to go through it. And so I know we've got some developments going up on hilltops, and so let's say that you buy an empty land in a lot in the Hilltop subdivision that's in the R1 zoning district. So that's your single family zoning district. Well, you can look here and it's going to tell you that your maximum building height right now is 34 feet. And so that's as high as you would be able to build. You go down to the next one, so minimum buildable lot size. And so you need to have a lot that's a certain size to be able to build. And so what you'll see here throughout the development requirements is a few of them will say varies, so you'll have a couple different options and there'll be a notation there. And so to do that, you want to go look over here and see notes 2 and 7. And so below the, you have to close out of it, but scroll down, you'll find those notes. And so basically I've already kind of looked this one up, but in the R1 zoning district, it gives you 2 different areas of town, where in one area, I think it's south of the Seward Highway and Phoenix Road intersection, your minimal building lot size is 300 square feet, but if you're north of that, that's 3,000 square feet and 6,000 square feet north of that marker. And so Hilltop would be north of that marker, so you need a minimum of 6,000 square feet to build in the R1 zoning district. Your minimum lot width, and so kind of the same thing in that 30 feet tracks with the 3,000 square foot area, and so 60 feet would be the minimum lot width you would need for that area of town. Right here you've got your minimum front yard setback, so you have 20 feet in the front yard, and you have these two are both minimum front yard setbacks for just different areas, but if you can see, the only difference is in the industrial zoning district. And so 20 feet there. This one's an interesting one. So you have your side yard setback, and it tells you the notes, but I can tell you here, it says 5 or 5 minimum with 15 total. And so in that area where it's 3,000 foot is the minimum that you need to develop. Your minimum yard setbacks are that first one, which is 5 feet. So 5 feet on each side. Once you get north of that boundary in the 6,000 square foot area, you've got a 5 minimum with 15 total. And so what that means is you need at least 5 on each side, but the combination of each setback needs to add up to at least 15 feet. So if you have 5 feet on one side of the setback, you need 10 on the other. You could do 7 and 8, 9 and 6. And so that's kind of how that works. And then this one, next one, makes it pretty easy for you. If you're adjacent to a street, you've got a 10-foot setback on that side. So then you know you have 10 feet on that side, and then your other side would be your minimum 5 feet. You got your rear setback, so how much room you've got in the back where you're, and again, these setbacks are the areas that you cannot develop on and build on, and so you got 10 feet in the back. And then if you want to build accessory buildings on your lot, they have different height requirements, and so you got 20 feet here. And then this last one is a big one, depending on what zoning district you are. It's your maximum lot coverage, and so that is the percentage of your lot that you can build on. And so the percentage goes up as you get into more of your densely populated residential zoning areas, and the commercials are higher as well, with up to 100%, but in the R1 zoning district you have 35%. And so if you're building your primary dwelling unit, that's something that you would want to keep in mind if you do plan to build an accessory dwelling unit or accessory buildings on your lot, because the combination of all those still needs to be below that 35-foot threshold.
Alright, so we'll move on to the land uses allowed table. And so the land uses allowed contains both this section before the table and then the table. So there are a few land uses that are specifically listed before the table and outline some regulations specific to those uses. So we have lodging, which is short-term rentals, and all the regulations for that. Then we have regulations for mobile vendors, which mobile vendors are specifically vendors that operate within on city-owned property within and their specific sites that have been designated by the city for mobile vendors. So they're different than transient merchants are the ones that operate on private property. Then we have regulations for roving vendors, and then the transient merchants, which are the ones that operate on your food trucks that operate on private properties. And then we have specific regulations for livestock and marijuana establishments, which we've become very familiar with over the past years. We've worked on that. And then camping regulations and employee campgrounds. So those are the few land uses that have specific regulations. And then we go down to our land uses allowed table. This one has a key. So an O stands for a use that is permitted outright. H, the use requires a home occupation, which you'll notice on this left-hand side there is a section specifically that outlines the regulations for a home occupation. C would be a use that requires a conditional use permit, and then P is a use that requires an administrative permit. And this P, the administrative permit, could be from a variety of departments. It's not just from community development. So for example, like the mobile vendor is a P. It requires an administrative permit, and that permit comes out of the clerk's office. Or we have storage containers are a P in some zoning districts, and that permit, administrative permit, comes through the building department. So when you see, for the general public, when you see a P over here in the land use allowed table, it might require a little bit of calling to figure out what permit it is that you need to get, but just know that there is a permit that is required. Of course, the O's and the C's are a little bit more straightforward, but yeah, I think this is, of course, using the expand button makes it a lot easier to go through the uses on this side. So, and not all the uses that you can think of are within this land uses allowed table, and there are caveats for that within the code above. I won't try and dig them out, but there's specific regulations that if there is a use that is not listed within the land uses allowed table, that it would just follow the process for a conditional use permit.
And then I'm going to talk about non-conforming uses, and I kind of, in previous meetings we've kind of interchanged non-conforming with non-compliant. I kind of want to set a little bit the record straight there, because there is a difference. And so a non-conforming use would be, and there's code around this, but it's a little easier just to explain. Let's say, for example, right now you can have an accessory building in your R1 zoning district, and this would never happen, but let's say council changed that and you're no longer allowed to have an accessory building in R1 zoning district. Well, if you currently have an R1 accessory building, even though the code changed, doesn't mean you have to get rid of that building. You're kind of, and I hate to use the word grandfathered in, because I feel like that implies that it's good forever, which is not really the case. Non-conforming uses, the cities do try and like limit them or remove them as quickly as the law allows. It's kind of how the code is referenced, but But yeah, but essentially, if you have a use, you can have, let's see, where is that section? Non-conforming uses. So yeah, you can have a lot that is non-conforming, you can have a structure that is non-conforming, you can have a use that is non-conforming, and that just basically says that when you developed that lot, when you built those structures, or when you had that land use, it was allowed in code, and code is basically telling you that you can continue that use even though the code has changed. And so you're not technically non-compliant because you're compliant with the code, you're just non-conforming. But again, the goal of non-conforming uses is to eventually, hopefully, minimize them, reduce them, and so section D here kind of gives you some caveats with it. And so when it comes to a non-conforming use, you can't expand a non-conforming use on your property, you can't move it. And the second one is the big one here, and that is when a non-conforming use is discontinued for 1 year, the use shall not therefore be permitted, except in conformance with the regulations of this chapter, which means if you don't use that non-conforming use for a year, then you must abide by the new code regulation. So the easiest example I can give is the short-term rental changes that happened a couple years ago. So you can no longer do whole house rentals in the primary residential zoning districts. But if you were already doing one before, you can continue to maintain that use. But if you decided, you know, I want to take off for a year and not worry about it, kind of shut down my shop, my operation for a season, well, if that year goes by and you didn't maintain that use, if you don't have that permit on file with the city, when you try to reapply like the second year after, well, it's going to be denied because now you have to conform to the new code. And so that is kind of how the non-conforming. So non-conforming uses are compliant with code. They're just non-conforming because they no longer conform to the current up-to-date code standards.
And that if you sell the property to somebody else, even though it's there, that would not carry over as well.
So the use does carry over.
So within a year, if you sell say for like the short-term rental, and you sell it to somebody, you have a short-term rental, you're getting out of the business, so to speak, you sell it to somebody else, they can take that as the new owner?
Yeah. They just need to make sure that, you know, if the sale's happening in the summer, that the new owners continue to operate it, because it's the use is what's given that year grace period, not the owner, if that makes sense.
I thought it was when we did that, once it was no longer the same owners and stuff like, 'cause I mean, once the season's over, obviously you don't want to mess with anybody, but I thought it was once the season was over, a new owner, the whole new thing, it was sort of like, you had to start, you had to start to be conforming again. I think it's not.
Yeah, it does transfer to a new owner, and I think there is verbiage in there, just...
Is there? Okay. For some reason, I thought that was, I know that was a big discussion point, and I don't remember.
Maybe it's the CUP, but yeah, I think the only regulation in here that limits the use continuing is that the length of time. Yeah, if it's
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, good.
So then we'll move on to conditional use permits and variances. So they're right next to each other. And both of these sections lay out the purpose for conditional use permit and variance, the process then for the applicant and the commission, and then the future outlook for that permit. So we have the intent, there's the purpose, and then the process, the application, public hearing, review criteria, approval, and then the future outlook. So then the requirements, if there's modification of the final approval, and then when it expires, or if it expires, and transferability. So yeah, this one does say that it is it can't go be transferred from one parcel to another, but that it may be transferred from one owner to another for the same use. The one especially important aspect of both of these the conditional use permit and the variance is this review criteria. So both for the applicant and the commission, the applicant should be looking very closely at the review criteria to make sure that their project, their request meets all of this review criteria, and then because this is what the commission will be using to determine if they are going to grant that CUP or to grant the variance. So down here we have the review criteria for the variance.
And just a couple other ones we want to hit. I'm not going to spend too much on sign code because that's a whole thing in and of itself, and it's on our priority list for this year. But if you have a business and you want to change your signage or put signs up, just know that there's definitions here for the different kinds of signs, and then there's regulations about what signs are allowed outright, what signs are prohibited, and then there are permitted signs that need to be applied for and come through our office. And then there's also like district regulations, so depending on what zoning district you are in, it tells you like the square footage and like how much signage that you can have in general. And so that one's just a little easier to contact our office and we can help you navigate those. And so we won't get into the weeds of that one here, but yeah, so there is a section for signs in our code as well.
And then the final section in Title 15 is the floodplain management. And essentially, if a property is located within the FEMA identified floodplain, then they would need to abide by specific regulations in this section for their development of that property. And on our website, on the first page of community development, if you scroll down to resources, there's the floodplain development and management. And then if you go to the KPP floodplain map, it'll open up this map, which shows all the FEMA floodplains. So AO, AE, these are all identified floodplains. VE, the gray with the letter X means that they are not in a floodplain. So essentially when we get building permits, and other types of permits, preliminary plats, we're always reviewing this map to make sure that a property is not within the floodplain, and if so, then the property owner is notified that if they plan to develop that land, that they would need an additional permit and perhaps to abide by additional regulations.
Yeah, so we'll just wrap up kind of by saying any of the permitted uses in Title 15, you can find those applications on our website, and we can help applicants. Part of our job is to help you navigate that process. And code is not meant to be read like a book from start to finish. So sometimes you got to know like what you're looking for to find the information that you need, which can be difficult for the public, which we understand, and so that's part of our job is to help, if you can't find something, help you navigate it and get those answers. So please feel free to reach out to us, and we can, oftentimes we might have to call you back or do a little code review and research ourselves to get a kind of comprehensive list of what you're looking for, but we're pretty good at getting back to people in a timely manner to help them, move forward with whatever their projects may be. So Title 15.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I know this has raised several questions for me, and if it has for you as well, I encourage you to contact Human Development and get it ironed out. Our code is definitely not perfect.
Nope.
It's always in evolution. So, next on the agenda is continuation of our May 20th work session to review and discuss parking requirements in Seward City Code, starting on page 5 of the packet, with a discussion on potential amendments. Would the staff please give an overview?
Yeah, just from our last conversation, we kind of had some big picture conversations about just parking in general, and then we're also kind of looking at the current paradigm. And so because there are developers out there who might find some benefit if some of the development requirements when it comes to parking or modified or changed, like we thought we'd start there as the commission can kind of review some of the books and resources we've shared for kind of the bigger parking conversation. But I think Chair Griswold did a great job having an outline here to run through, so I will turn it over to her to facilitate this process.
Thank you so much. So this worksheet follows the packet on page 5, and I focused primarily on what was outlined in yellow, but if a few things came up, I added them as well. So looking at the worksheet, and I think there's copies up there for the public if you don't have one. The land use column under B, I suggest changing the first heading from dwellings and lodges to dwellings, housing, and lodging. And that would follow our definitions. That's how our residential is broken down. Welcome. Glad to see you. So, any discussion on that? Does that make sense to the commissioners? Just to clarify it?
Yeah, just adding a little bit more, identifying what's specifically in it, that's good.
Right, we don't have lodges really, so, okay. And then the next one is to move multifamily dwelling institutional and dormitories/bunkhouses from institutional and public uses to dwellings, housings, and lodgings category. And when I was reading through this, that they really stood out to me as not belonging in the institutions and public uses, the way our code reads. So I suggest moving them up to where it makes, at least to me, it made more sense to have it under dwelling, housing, and lodging as our main categories.
Sounds good.
Okay?
I have a question.
Sure.
Multifamily dwelling is specific to institutional multifamily dwellings, so it makes more sense to leave it in institutions, perhaps.
There's another category for multifamily dwellings.
Right, it's already up in the lodging and housing.
Right.
And this is specifically to institutional
Correct.
multifamily dwellings. So, like, the title of that section is institutions and public uses, so it's for like the Providence, like multifamily dwelling, or maybe isn't it? Is that institutional?
Yeah, I was curious on this one, so I looked into it, and yeah, it's institutional multifamily is just multifamily housing owned by like a larger corporation, government, institute, and so like AvTech has like apartment units for their students that come with families, or any of the low-income housing. Apartments, I think, would fall under this category, and so I think the question, I think where it goes would depend on what you think, because if you move it to the dwellings, you're increasing the parking requirement from 1 per unit, right, to the 2 spaces per unit plus the half a space.
Or are you saying just move the whole thing with the parking requirements into that? That was part of it too, is I was like, does this change the parking requirements, or is it just for organizational purposes?
Oh yeah, I guess that would be.
Right.
The
I
correct
felt it
parking.
was more for organizational purposes, so you could compare like to like. So you can say, well, in its multifamily dwelling institutional, we just have 1 space per unit. I would keep that with it and just move it up, so we're discussing all those similar housing, dwelling, lodging types together. But not to change
Okay,
it.
that's
Yeah,
was
not
my
to- not
confusion.
to
There we
change
go.
it.
Okay.
That's what my confusion too. It doesn't
Right.
matter to me where it goes then.
Right. So because there's other categories under, or there's other entries under that, so this would just be another entry, but under that main heading of dwellings, housing, and lodging. And then dormitories, bunkhouses are also a form of housing, so that should go up in the dwelling, housing, and lodging category with its particular requirements. Just, I think it makes sense, and it
It's
makes
cleaner
it
that way.
easier.
Definitely
Makes it
clearer.
easier to compare what we've got going on. And then, Our parking code P1 refers to shopping center mall, much to my surprise. That's probably the only place it pops up, but it wasn't under the commercial category. So on page 6, I would, under commercial, that heading commercial, I would add shopping center mall, because it should be in there since it was highlighted as a use. So it would go under commercial.
Isn't that right there?
Food store, shopping center, well, that's true. Thank you, Brennan. So it's already there, under food store, shopping center and mall. So let's strike that. No need to add it. I did not notice that. Thanks. The next one is a new category. We've been discussing mixed-use buildings, and I looked that up, and the International Building Code does not address mixed-use buildings, but it does address mixed occupancy buildings. And this one website made quite a big deal about, it's not in the International Building Code, there's nothing anyone can enforce, there's no code, there's no regulations for it. So I believe we need to add a term that does have a presence in the building code, and I hope the fire department can chime in on this too. But this is all, preliminary. It's a work session, and hopefully they can get on board and advise us as well.
So
But
you're looking at primarily like a shop in the bottom and apartments up top.
Right,
and that
exactly
kind of
what
thing.
Kelly was talking about. We don't have a category for that right now.
No.
So I would like to suggest we add mixed occupancy buildings under the commercial category, and then we can place it in the code, have a definition, have,
Work sessions.
everything else that
Yeah.
follows from that. Because we already have discussed having mixed-use buildings, like in our 48-foot zones. But actually, I think we need to change that to mixed occupancy. So that's another discussion, but this would be like a placeholder to show where we would like it and then develop it.
Well, and I'd like to add on to that for commercial zoning, there is not very clear requirements for parking in that, so can this be in the parking section, if you add it to that section? Like, we need to make something that makes sense. We've got all of these buildings down on 4th that are mixed occupancy buildings. They all have, almost all of them have 4 to 6 apartments in the top floor, like top 2 floors perhaps, whatever they are. Like, to make something that kind of brings all of those buildings into compliance is part of the problem some of those building owners are facing as they're trying to keep their building up together, because if it falls down, they can't rebuild the same thing that they already have there, so I would maybe like to address that and make it so that those people are all brought into compliance, and then it's clear for someone like me, because all I've got to go on is this little thing at the top that says, except in Central Business District or Harbor Commercial Districts, there shall be provided permanently maintained off-street parking for each principal business. So it doesn't tell me what I am allowed to do. Like, it just says, like, I don't have to follow these rules, but it doesn't say what rules I have to follow.
Right. And this is something that hasn't had a name for a long time. Once we have a name and a category, definition, then we can make those land uses allowed table things and parking. Yeah.
Because she came and talked to us, and an issue is where she wants to build, like, parking is exempt in that zoning district, right? So based on that alone, you'd like, well, I don't need to provide parking, but she needs a conditional use permit, which comes before a commission, and the commission usually vets a parking plan, but because it's not in code, like, that's can be confusion from a developer standpoint as they're trying to get their plans together, not knowing what the commission would require.
The conditional use permit, I have to have the plans. Plans cost like $100,000. Like, I can't throw that kind of money around without knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
it's not surprising that we don't have this in code yet because so much of our code is behind the times.
Absolutely.
But now we're trying to deal with it.
No, I'm hoping we can address that specifically.
Right.
Because it's leaving, not just me, but a lot of people with
Right.
commercial space.
But you've served as an excellent spokesperson to raise this issue for us, and I appreciate
I
that.
spend, take a look at it.
You bet. Okay. And then add auto repair to, under commercial, to gasoline service station / auto repair. And this recently came up, but it's also, in our definitions, they're listed together, so it just made sense to clarify that and include it. Okay, those are my edits for that table. Does anyone have other edits you'd like to look at right now?
I don't think so.
Okay, we can always come back to it as well. Okay, so let's move on to B, which is on page... No, it's still on page 5. So B has...
Sorry, Chair, could we go back to that one?
To which one?
Just the auto repair,
Oh, sure.
just so to clarify. Were you thinking of taking because right now gas service station requires 1 parking space for 2 gas pumps, so an auto repair place would not have that, but there is a service or repair shop, and so are you, I guess, what would be the
Is there a service,
requirement?
up there?
What would be the minimum number of parking spaces? Which of that language would you have?
So, based on this gasoline service station requirement, which we don't have anymore, by the way, as far as service station, but it did say 2 spaces for each grease rack, wash rack, and a stall for servicing vehicles. So I felt that described auto
okay.
services really well.
Because the one up, couple up there, further up there, it's a service or repair shop. I think that might have been was that where you're referring to?
Right.
And
That's
there's-
just different,
And
It's
there's
different, but a
motor-
different parking requirement for those two.
right?
Yeah. And there was motor vehicle sales and service establishment.
Right. But that just really popped out at me. 2 spaces for a grease rack, yeah. Wash rack, yeah, and stall for servicing vehicles. That to me describes an
Okay,
auto repair
perfect.
shop really well. And that can be, put some colons in there or whatever, semicolons. But we no longer have service stations in gas stations.
So would you wind up deleting the service or repair shop? That's 1, 2, 3 up, because you're adding it to the bottom one? Seems redundant.
Service or repair shop would probably need clarification, because to me, that's a general thing. Like, go get a zipper repaired or something, what is a repair shop? So we'd need to look at that closer.
What about the motor vehicle sales and service establishment right under that?
So what does a motor vehicle sale and service establishment do? Is
Because
this
often,
like
like a Honda dealership will also have a repair shop frequently, where you,
what does it do in Seward?
well,
We used to have the Buick.
That's right, historically.
Yeah, we had all these, maybe this
Right.
start out from that.
I know it. Some of these uses are
Old.
woefully old, yeah.
I guess you would just,
Yeah,
is that what, like, tire brand would fall under? Because it's not sales, but it'd be a motor vehicle service establishment. Is that the one that falls under?
yeah, it seems, you can make an argument for that one.
Just looking at how many cars are parked outside of Terry or Tire Brand or whatever, like, they need more than 4 spaces for each auto service stall than they need just 2 spaces for each. Like, they have probably 20 cars in that lot right there.
I know.
But that would maybe fall more into the auto mechanicals, motor vehicle sales and service, which is then, and you can make that more clear and just be auto
When the motor vehicle sales and service establishment just talks about square feet, that to me does not relate as closely as 2 spaces for each grease rack, wash rack, and a stall for servicing vehicles. That just seems to be a lot more descriptive of what actually happens at an auto repair shop.
But it is, they do, that's 4 spaces for each auto service stall, so Terry's has 3 stalls, so they would need 12 parking spots plus 1 space for 400 square feet of sales floor area, which they don't really have.
So I'm just seeing under service or repair shop. Maybe I'm not looking at the right
Motor
one.
vehicle sales and service establishment.
Okay, one parking space for each 400 square feet of gross sales floor area, plus 4 spaces for each auto service stall.
So that's helpful, our definitions that we went over. There are 2 different definitions for auto repair station and auto service station.
Okay.
And under auto service station, at the end, it says also known as a gas station. And so I think the gasoline service station is where our gas stations would fall under. And in that definition, the place primarily used for the retail dispensing of motor fuels and installation of tires and batteries. And so, yeah, so that was like when Terry's or Tire Brand was just doing oil and tire changes, they fell under the definition of a gas station or auto service station. But then when they went to expand their services, that's what bumped them into that auto repair station, which is what triggered the CUP, because they were different uses, outright versus permitted. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is helpful.
Do you think we could fine tune those definitions, since gas stations don't seem to do services anymore? It would just be, hey, you just need some parking, you need space for your vehicles to be in line, standing room.
Yeah, we can see what other towns are defining those as, and
Right,
look
so that
into
would be
that one.
a modernization of that.
Yeah.
code. And then we can see where best to put the auto sales.
We'd also get rid of motor vehicle sales altogether, because we're not gonna have a Honda dealership, or something.
Never, yeah.
I don't think so.
Ever.
Yeah.
Right.
So they just tidy it up, because I think you're right. I think this is, a lot of this, after reading this and having been here for a while, because that actually used to be, before Terry's, it was a long time ago, it was a gas station there. It was Shealy, I think, had it. Yeah. And so he was doing repairs and had gas, as I recall.
Right, and
Yeah.
Modern Motors sold
Yeah.
gas and did repairs.
Yeah, so I think maybe once we tidy up the definitions, then it might clarify some of the questions we have on this, because it's older verbiage.
Right, right.
Okay, thank you for,
That sound good?
yep.
Okay, good feedback. Then, now we're gonna go through the table where it says minimum number of parking spaces. So highlighted in yellow at the top is multiple family dwellings and other places containing multiple dwelling units. And right now, it says 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit plus a half a space for every unit larger than 2 bedrooms or greater than 1,000 square feet in size. And we've had some discussion about this. Would anyone like to tackle that one?
The origins of this is, it's sort of hard, because I guess it depends on where you are. I just relate to the apartment complex that's near us, at the Legion, and there's cars, on top of cars, but then some places you go and it's not nearly that bad. So, maybe this was put in here initially as a purpose for, whatever at the time, that's what they were expecting or needing, but are we really needing all of that anymore? I don't know. 2 bedrooms greater than 1,000 square feet. I'm not sure. You guys probably have a better feel at times.
There's an audience.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Kelly.
one of my other complaints, and this doesn't necessarily have to do with me, but just because I want to have housing in general for Seward, it's very difficult to build apartment buildings, condos, townhouses with this requirement here. And if everybody's saying we need more housing, we need to make it a little bit easier to build housing without these requirements. Correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody, say I built a 10-unit apartment building and I wanted to turn all 10 units into short-term rentals, I would have to have parking for those because of the permitting process, right?
Right.
Okay, so that's not gonna hurt, like, if we eliminate, let's say, I don't think we should, let's say we eliminate parking for apartment buildings, it would still be, people would still have to put parking in order to have short-term rentals there.
Correct.
Okay, so it needs to be less restrictive than this in order to allow people to be building developments like condos, apartments, and townhouses. We don't have a lot of those here, and I think part of it is this. We also have an excessive number of studio apartments and one-bedroom apartments right now because it's way less restrictive to build 500 square feet and have one parking space per 500 square feet. What we really need now is 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom apartments, condos, townhouses, because, and I think for a lot of reasons, we want more families to come here, and they don't have anywhere to live that's like entry-level apartment, condos, townhouses to get into Seward. So I would look at making this less, and also keep in mind that R1, R2, R3, OR, and UR all have maximum buildable areas on their lots, which leaves setbacks in the front and the back for at least 6 parking spots in the front and the back. Because if you have a town-sized lot, let's say that's 30 feet, that can fit 3 parking spots on the alley side, and that can fit 3 parking spots on the street side. So you already automatically have parking built into all of those zones somewhat already anyways.
On the property itself, you're saying?
On the property itself, because you can't build on all that space.
Right.
The rear yard setback isn't long enough for a car.
But the
Needs to be
maximum
18
coverage
feet.
is only 1/3 of the lot, so on a farm, it's
okay.
more than 1/3. But let's just make numbers easy. It's a 3,000 square foot lot. You can only build 1,000 square feet, so you have 2,000 square feet of area that could be used for parking
Right.
along there too. So that kind of helps make it work out without even having to have requirements. So I don't know what the answer is. I'm just pointing out, like, there's a lot of things in place that kind of keep parking forced into those zones anyways. And then this still doesn't solve my problem of.
We'll get getting to that.
But it is a frustration because I feel like there are people who would develop if it was easier to develop larger units without this requirement.
So I was thinking that 2 per unit would be consistent. Homes larger than 1,000 square feet or with more than 2 bedrooms are not required to provide more parking, and neither should apartment units. So if we just stuck with 2 parking spots per unit, that would be very consistent with our housing requirements. John?
So going off of how she kind of ended her sentence there, of even reducing still doesn't answer helps, but what my point is, I don't think there's a single concern or parking issue that isn't solved by paid parking. And I'd like to hear any that tell me why paid parking doesn't work and get rid of all parking restrictions.
So unfortunately, and maybe staff can guide us, Title 1115 deals with paid parking, and we don't. Is that right?
Yeah, so parking regulations in that aspect is a different title than what P&Z has authority over. I think when we did our initial presentation on the topic, like if you were to eliminate parking minimums, you would not want to do that in a vacuum, and so it would have to be done in coordination with some other departments, city council, and so I think the conversation for the commission, when we have like the broader conversation again on parking, is if there is intrigue, not saying you'd go that way, but if there's intrigue and just kind of looking at what that would look like, then that would be more of a, either a joint work session or just kind of bringing in the other departments that have that kind of authority to see if that would even be something that they would consider. And so we would kind of be the, educational piece of what that would look like. But yeah, we don't really touch the, paid parking meter section of code.
It is a really interesting idea that we've touched on. And I was real excited about pursuing that, but then I realized we don't have the authority to do it. Let's let Kelly pipe up.
If you had something to.
All I was
on?
gonna say is, we wouldn't be the first city to do that, and I'm sure following up on how Homer, downtown Anchorage, it's all been a benefit. And the benefit is development in downtown Seward, development in Seward, and that's the reason why there's articles written about it. Development downtown Anchorage, development in Homer. And I believe in the 8 years that I've been here, outside of Tugas, I haven't seen anything over $1 million built. So, I've seen a lot of property change hands, but I've seen no development. I've seen a lot of plans, no one's been able to do anything. So, I think something, like I said, we wouldn't be the first one to get rid of parking requirements, to get some sort of investment in sewer.
So I think there's an interest in having a discussion with the other departments on paid parking.
Sure, and I do update Kat on these conversations, and so my next meeting with her, I'll share that, because that would be something I would be interested in being a part of too, so.
Yeah, it ties in with what we're trying to do
Yep.
and what council tries to do. Go ahead, Kelly.
So I'm going back to the multifamily dwellings and other places containing multi-dwelling units. I agree that half a space for every unit larger should probably go away. I'm wondering if, because it sounds like what everybody wants is more density and the higher density zones, would that be like OR and UR? Should we maybe split this where single family, two family, and three family dwellings are 2 spaces per dwelling unit, but OR and UR are 1 space per dwelling unit, because that's closer to town, hopefully people are walking more. It may be like a family or a, single parent and their kids, they might not need 2 spaces. And UR is located, kind of back here on the back side over here and down by the waterfront, and OR is basically up further on 4th, which is kind of halfway in the middle of town. Like if you allow people to build, because otherwise you have 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit means on a normal town site lot, you could only build 3 units to have all 6 spaces that would naturally come with that space that's available. 3 units isn't necessarily a lot. It doesn't really lend itself. I'm imagining, I don't know how many units you could fit into that space on an OR UR lot. I haven't looked into it, but it seems like you could maybe fit more, like 2 per floor or something. I don't know. I haven't looked into these, but maybe it makes more sense to make it more or less restrictive for places that you have, that you want higher density, like OR and UR, and the more family areas, like 2 parking spaces, which will kind of lend itself to the size of the lots in the buildable area anyways.
That's a really interesting idea. What does the commission think?
Trying to make the code produce what we want to have happen in town, so I'm open to suggestions.
I guess the size of the lot too has a lot to do with it too, because an OR that's along, say, 4th Avenue and the rest like this, a lot of those are old town sites, and so they're 30 by 100, and so that, how much land are we going to, what size of a building can you put on it, and then you have to consider the parking on top of it. That, and also too, if it's smaller families, so you can't have a parking spot for each of the rooms, because you're gonna have kids of some sort, and so that might have, if that's the intent, is to go for the, the slightly less expensive, and looking at it from the standpoint of, younger families and maybe the 1 car, even though it's a if it's just maybe a duplex or whatever it is, I'm not sure if you do that there, but it's one car per area, per building, then even though there's other rooms in there, they should still be able to fit some of that stuff on there. I don't know, it's hard to wrap your brain around how much the land is, and then, you have the setbacks, and you have all the different things there, and if it's not that many people in there, then it's doable, but you can't really restrict who's gonna move in there. It could be multiple people in there that all have cars, but the buyers would decide,
It's laid out though, so that OR is kind of a more dense area, and most of it is located halfway between the harbor and here, so it makes sense that there could be quite a few walkers in there to get to most of the things that they need
That
in
could be,
town.
except for the grocery store maybe.
Yeah, I drove taxi for a summer. I took a lot of people to the grocery store.
I bet, yeah.
And then UR kind of is in the same band here, but.
No, I think it's a good idea. I just, just trying to wrap my head around that, because I live in OR, and so I live in one of those little lots, and so I'm just trying to figure out how you would, put a R2 or something like that in that area.
Like a duplex.
Yeah, a duplex in there and be able to fit it all in.
I'm
I'm not opposed to it, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around it.
Part of the restriction is the lot size. What is it for OR? Like the buildable lot size is what, 40%? 45%?
For OR, I think it's 50%, but there is the lot size restriction for duplex and multifamily of being a minimum of 6,000 square feet lot for a duplex, except in the federal edition, it can be 5,000 square feet.
So you put a 3,000 square foot building on 2 town lots. Is that right?
So,
If the buildable area is 50%, you have to have a 6,000 square foot lot in OR. You have a 3,000 square foot building. You have 3,000 square feet around it that would just be naturally, well, at least in the front and the back would be natural to parking. Because you can't do anything else there.
You could
anyways.
definitely do the parking on that.
Right? But then if you require 2 building spaces per unit for that building, let's say, I don't know, could you go 4 units in, maybe 2 units, 3 stories, that's 6 units. This says you have to have 12 parking spaces. That seems a little bit tight. 6 parking spaces maybe is a little bit more reasonable for those 2 zones, UR and OR.
It would be a tight coordination of parking, but I think it could be done.
But I think you would have more parking available than 1 unit, just because it's 2 lots. Each parking spot is 18 feet wide, so that puts 6 parking spots in the front, 6 parking spots in the back. So I guess you can't do 12 spots if you had 6 units. I don't know. Again, I haven't looked into this, but I don't know, if you want more density, and you want more people to build housing and make it easier, I wouldn't leave it as 2 parking spaces per unit. Because especially there, I think the buildable lot size makes it so that you have parking kind of naturally anyways.
What I'm concerned about is spillover parking on the neighborhood, so that people are forced to park in the public right-of-way. And that passes on the problem to the neighborhood. I like to avoid that. Go ahead.
I would say that is exactly the thing that paid parking will solve. Like, you find the areas where spillover is happening, you charge for it. Like, all of this is solved with eliminating parking requirements and doing paid parking. There are research papers provided, like, there are published authors who've done decades of research into this problem. They've come to the conclusion parking minimums don't really get you anything that you want. They have a lot of problems. I would ask anybody who wants to put a number on how many spaces a lot needs. Give me a factual, research-based evidence of that number, and we can't find one. We can't even agree here right now about a single property, because everybody has their own requirements, and everybody's life's different. Like, this is a very poor way to define what's required. Like, we need a table that's 1,000, lines long, and we might even get 2,000. I mean, it might be 10,000. It's just, it's so granular. I struggle to recommend any number to put in that.
I don't see that we could have paid parking in every neighborhood, where if we eliminated the parking requirements, you can't, like on your street, you've got lots of cars on your street, I've noticed, lots of cars. Small houses, small lots, lots of cars. And just seems if someone has a guest and they're parking in the street, you can't put paid parking there in your neighborhood.
Why not?
Why not?
Why not? It's,
How much
we're
do
all
it?
subsidizing the right of way. It's not land we own.
know.
It is the city's land.
And I believe the neighborhood you're talking about is now commercial, it's zoned OR, I believe it changed years ago. So it's not actually
Aren't you
residential.
You are.
Yeah,
You
yes, you
are.
are. Yeah. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, my part on that again is, we're not the first city to have growth and start offering paid parking. We don't have to have a joint work session with city council. We just simply reduce parking requirements and let them deal with their, what I'm gonna call an abortion of parking requirements on the street. It's a free-for-all. I drove around today, I live here, so I can point out just beyond someone that has a sticker on their car, they're the kayak, they stick out real easy. On the way here, I saw 7 in the church parking, and in front of my building. I've seen them parked at the senior center. These are young, athletic, they shouldn't be parking there. That's just my opinion, but the rule said they can absolutely. My whole point of this is, being a local, I counted at least 50 local cars parking. These are workers, employees that are parking on this main street here. And we're worried about congestion? We're not. We're not, because it's free, anyone can do it. I'm sure everyone that drove here parked as close as they could, and if we were gonna be here for 8 hours, you're gonna just stay there. My point is, the meters are gonna move it. We don't have to write rules on getting the meters, but what we should be doing is reducing the parking requirements to develop the growth. And sorry, Carol, you're worried about spillover. We have no evidence of spillover because we have no new development. We've had none. We have spillover from existing, but we have no new development. And we can't design parking requirements on stagnation because that's all we've had. And my other point of that is how I started is other cities that have grown, they will figure out, and the city can figure out where they need to move cars and how they'll move it, is they'll put a price on it. I guarantee you, if it was $2 in front of that church, all 7 vans are gone.
Where did they go? Did they go to someone's neighborhood?
Well, I don't know, but eventually they'll find a place where they can't afford to be. But for right now, they just can afford to be in, I mean, like, I guess, in your definition, thank goodness that's not someone's home, because the vans, kayaks have blocked that church, but then nobody lives there.
I have a thing here too as well, Carol.
Sure.
Because what it is those vans, especially when they closed the street and everything else, those vans are moved and they're all up and down Jefferson. They went there and they got the sides there, which is fine. They do all the rest of that stuff. But the thing that I concern myself with is, like, we've approved a CUP, just for example, that business. They gave us a parking plan where everything was supposed to be, and it was all, nice and tidy and what it was. But where are all those vehicles come the end of the season? So they have a storage place for those things somewhere. And so, but if, again, like to his point, paid parking, if we had it, then they would have to make a decision, where are they gonna put the rigs? In their storage area, not the storage area, because some of them do it out of town, some people have other places and things like this. But if it winds up doing that, I think that, we make a decision on a CUP, we figure that people are gonna abide by it, and oh gee, they don't. Then we have no teeth, because it's free parking. So I think there's got to be, a balance here, and yeah, we do need to talk to, who is it, who's the parking people for us? Chapter 11, who does that? Parks and Rec, is that who? Is it Parks and Rec who does?
Title 11, they do that?
Title 11, yeah. I'm assuming because don't they do the harbor stuff?
Is it Harbor?
Yeah,
Yeah, so it would be Parks and Rec, and so we'd probably have to have a discussion in that regard. But no, I totally agree. If you can park on your own land, that's great. And if you have the space for it, if you choose to have more cars or whatever, and you put it in the street, you pay for it. I mean, most other places do that. And, not saying that you have to bring revenue into the city, but it might add a little control to who's where and how they're doing it. And again, I just think there's an awful lot of, people freewheeling the parking stuff because they can park forever. I mean, we still have it a lot of people just pull up in the Legion and just sit there for a while, and, it's sort of like, we have to find and hunt people down, but, it just winds up being, if you have a control of what's going on, then I think people will be a little bit more responsible.
Right. Well, we could end this discussion right now and say we need Parks and Rec, or whoever's responsible for Title 11, to move forward with that discussion. But I feel that that's really important. It's a really important component of this discussion. But I would like to work with what we have right now and make the best guess. There's no magic number. But I'm back to my proposal that it's consistent. I'd like to be consistent. That 2 per unit is right now consistent with what we're requiring for a residence, regardless of how many bedrooms it has or how big it is. And this description targets how big it is and how many bedrooms it has, which does not seem consistent. So that's why I was going just 2 per unit. And if you could hold just a minute. But also like clarification, could you describe some examples about other places containing multiple dwelling units, so we know a picture of what we're looking at? So it says multiple family dwellings. That would be a triplex, a fourplex, multiplex. And then what are other places containing multiple dwelling units?
The only one that comes to mind would be a condo.
In a townhouse?
Yeah, a townhouse, because they're all on their own individual property, I wouldn't quite categorize
We
it that.
don't actually have condos in Seward. We have what we call the harbor condos, but they're all owned by the same person.
Yeah, so then they're not
really
true
condos. Yeah, so I'm not clear what we're describing here, but it'd be nice to clarify that if it means, and we could have condos in the future. So other places containing multiple dwelling units could be condos, and then also like to separate out the multiple occupancy buildings. I don't want that mixed in with this. So, thanks, so just be that, would be condos if we had them. Okay. Brennan?
Yes, so again, like, I understand you want to be consistent, but I don't know what in our directive says consistency trumps fairness. And I don't think being consistent isn't necessarily being fair. And again, if we're going to be consistent, can we say it's actually fair that we acquire 2 spaces? I mean, again, I want to, how do we get to 2 spaces? Just because it's consistent doesn't mean it's right. We're basing it on other stuff that has no basis. So we're creating consistency with something that has no basis. And that's where I have the problem, is let's go find a number. I challenge us to find a number that we could say is fair. Because obviously this is causing problems. And if we look to see where this came from, it has no factual basis. And that's the problem I have, is where can we find a number that has a factual basis?
Well, it seems that we are a car society right now, and it seems like there's an average of 2 cars per house. And if you have teenagers, you got a couple more cars. So I think that's perhaps one of the basis for that, is that it seems like people have 2 cars per dwelling, so then you need 2 parking spaces.
That's probably
Minimum.
the average of what has been associated with before. It's sort of like, yeah, like you're saying, I don't know what the background is. It's sort of like the, hotel and motel kind of thing. Nobody, the last work session we had, nobody could tell us how many people, how many cars you needed for each room. And I don't know if there's any studies for that either. Larger metropolitan areas would have that. But, do we have it, since we're sort of a unique critter? Because there's an awful lot of people that come in on buses, and half the parking lots are empty.
Just so many nuances to it, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if there was any.
Like consistency, you can say, let's have consistency with 2 and 3 bedroom apartments with the single family dwellings. And that can maybe be your baseline, but then there's still research out there that I think would show that like the socioeconomic status of people who live in single family houses versus apartment complexes is very different. And so that's gonna reduce the likelihood that people in apartment complexes are gonna have the same amount of vehicles as someone in a single family housing. And so you can use that to maybe say, okay, would 1.5 spaces work better for an apartment complex? And so, but there's just all these nuances that, I'm kind of, Brennan's point, it's just, there's so many nuances that you don't know about that contribute to.
2 per unit would be less than what's required now.
I guess the other
Your
thing,
point.
though, in that respect, I'm sorry, go ahead, his arm's gonna get tired.
Oh, go ahead, John.
It's all right. I feel like I'm taking a lot of air, but I did miss the last meeting like this, which is good because I got to listen to it. I think 2 parts. One, if I heard Tom Tugas right, he said planning and zoning is supposed to promote and try and invigorate development. He's a developer. He's actually the only one I know that's doing sizable development. But my point is, I think that listening to Brennan before on the size of stuff, there's a reason why we don't see any fourplexes. Because the odds are there's just not a single lot that it fits with this parking. So it's not, I have rentals. I've had multiple apartment rentals. It doesn't fit here. And the other thing is, I'm in the hotel industry. If I have a unit that's 1,000 square feet and it needs 2 cars per unit, but from what I heard last time is that maybe we're talking about hotels go to a half car space because Tom has to waste 20 grand a year on stuff he doesn't use. Well, you're just pushing them right into, and it's not fair. You're just leading, there's not more money in apartment buildings than there is nightly rentals. We already know that. Anyone that's ran one knows that. Small scale, big scale. But the parking requirements just pushes them even further into that they can't develop. And I guess my point is that you could, if I wanted to concede something like Carol's worried about spillover into these housing areas. Well, we have a fire marshal, we have a fire chief, you have a certificate of occupancy. If your building requires a certificate of occupancy, your dwelling unit should have the same parking requirements as hotel. It should just be commercial. Because if you're over, is it 3 or is it 4 in the city? 3 or, I think it's, let's call it 4. If you're over 4, you gotta have a certificate of occupancy. Fire, yeah. So the fire marshal has to come in and make sure your building's all up to code. It's now commercial. So let's make it an even playing game. If you have a certificate of occupancy, you're a commercial building. We need to have the same space requirements for an apartment building, a hotel, because all you're gonna do is, like, the only people that can afford and build here will be eventually hotels that are gonna get half space per unit or no. But that certificate of occupancy, that commercial building, that would kind of be your buffer towards these other areas that you're worried about spillover into. That could be a mechanism to clean this up, to make your parking spaces, because sure, a 5-unit and up, say, I think that could be 1 space per unit. But yeah, maybe a duplex, sure, you still have your two cars per unit, or 2.5 as it's currently ruled. The market's gonna choose that place. I mean, like, no one's going to stay at this commercial building that only provides 1 spot or half a spot or no spots. The family of 3 is going to choose the duplex, not that. But I don't think we'll be able to write our parking rules into this. All we're going to do is have no development. But I think you could use that, and it's already a mechanism in there. Fire chief already has to have certificate of occupancies for all these commercial buildings anyways. It's a rule. I mean, like that 8-unit, they have one. They have to. Every commercial, you don't have that many of them because there's not that many commercial buildings around here. But you already have that. So I think you could just limit and make it an even playing field for investment wise. And maybe you'll see someone actually build something for housing and not just daily rentals. Even the playing field, because it's a disadvantage right now. It's 2.5, maybe we'll reduce it to 2. And there's already hotels out there that have 0.68 or grandfathered into like nothing. You know, Hotel Seward has piddly nothing. Yeah, I mean, it's uneven. And what you're essentially doing is you're holding on to a monopoly. You're given a monopoly because no one else can invest here or build because the rules don't allow it. That's and how I'm being repetitive. There's no fourplexes. Fourplexes make great money. They're great investments. They're built everywhere. They don't fit here because of our parking requirements.
There are fourplexes up in the Phoenix Heights subdivision.
Right.
New
There's
ones.
also a fourplex on 4th, just south of Sawyer Properties.
Right.
A couple doors down.
Right. One on First, really old one on First.
Yeah, old,
Yeah.
really old ones.
Well, but there's new ones up at
Please.
Phoenix Heights.
I haven't drove up it.
Yeah, they are happening here. And P&Z is not supposed to promote development. We're supposed to interpret the code. That's our job. But we do have a priority to look at parking, so that's what we're doing. I'd like to move on. We haven't decided anything about multiple family dwellings in condos, and maybe that's how it's going to be for the rest of this table. But I think we need to keep moving. Is that all right with the commission? So the next fun one is hotels and motels. And this right now is 1 space per guest unit. And I believe, Kelly, you said not room, but unit, and it does say unit here. So that's good, that's already taken care of. And
Should we
as,
vote to make that half a space at the last meeting?
well, here's the deal. Again, it's based on little data. The use of free on-site parking and city-paid parking lots enables less parking needed for hotels. For example, if we could mention one of our developers, he pays people, he reimburses people when they use the city parking lot across the street. So that makes his a little more remote site not used, because why would they? They could park for free where he's paying a lot of money to provide that free parking, but he's also reimbursing them for using a city parking lot. So we're getting some skewed data there where he says nobody uses my remote site. And the same thing with the hotel down the street. Why would they want to park over 700 feet away no valet service, no shuttle, when they can park free on our street. Or I think they also scoot across to Railway Avenue. So with that, option of free parking or reimbursed parking, it makes it hard to determine how many spaces you actually need. If people were actually forced to pay for their parking and not be reimbursed by the kind hotel, how many spaces would we need in front of the, paid parking? When I drove around a couple of nights ago, Fifth Avenue was absolutely plugged. The hotel people were using both sides of the street. There's 2 hotels on Fifth, free parking. So obviously they don't need any parking because they're getting it for free. The Breeze Inn, however, and we have this in our data sheet, which I appreciate, tells how many rooms and how many units and how many parking spaces. Breeze Inn has 101 parking spaces and most of those were full. And I can't imagine where they would park if they did not have that parking lot. It's a tremendous benefit for that hotel to provide convenient parking, free parking on their own property for their guests. Otherwise, they would just completely fill up the north lot. So that's great. One room per unit, and it was almost all full. So that to me is a success story where they have provided adequate parking for their guests. Everyone has a room, everyone has a parking spot. So now we're back to some code that was all these, well, we can look at the chart later, but there's so many different fractions on how many and parking spaces you need, and those were all in violation of our code. Parking code K does not permit a reduction of parking spots. So somehow, all those different deals got negotiated without complying with our code. So technically, I think they're non-conforming uses, or just outright illegal, because the whole process was illegal. So we can't arbitrarily say, oh, you get half the parking spot per unit, and you, yeah, how about 0.65? And over there, whatever, 3/4, it's just so arbitrary, and they were all done illegally, not conforming to our code. So we kind of have to go back to the drawing board on that. And I don't think we're going to come to a resolution on
We
this
won't on any of
number
these tonight because there's
either.
really no numbers for it. Because
Right.
the Breeze targets a certain population, I think, and I'll tell you right now, because it's free parking, everybody in the front is parking in there too. They're not just all Breeze
Probably,
people.
right.
And then, you've got the ones over at, whether it's the Gateway or the 360 or the 360. Now, if there was, if you were to build a hotel, or, Tom was gonna build a new hotel, if he didn't have to pay that, just to get the hotel permissions and then lease the railroad land to prove that he had a parking plan, then he would be able to, obviously put people over there in the city lot and get it reimbursed and probably save him some money. How many, 20 grand a year? That was crazy. But, since there is no real number, it's all, again, getting back to it's dependent upon what the service is provided or the need is. So I don't know, we can banter it all day long, but I don't think unless there's some sort of study about it, and I don't think there is, at least around here, are we gonna come up with a reasonable number?
Right. How many people come by train to stay at hotels? Train, motor coach, cruise ship,
Yeah. that's
private
fine.
vehicles, RVs. It's kind of surprising to me, but people with RVs are staying at hotels. And if they're more than 19 feet, then they have to be in the city parking lot, apparently. So,
Danny?
The Breeze one's interesting, because I think that's I don't want to give it away too much, but I think that's a little local thing that people do is in the summer, I'll park behind between the Breeze and the restaurant.
Right.
And we did not share this information because most of it was guessing, but we did reach out to all the hotels in town and ask them if they knew like how many of their guests brought cars or vehicles. And they all gave us a percentage, but 90% of them, or maybe 85% of them, 80% of them guessed. But for the Breeze, yeah, actually I misread that. That's all spot on, but that was not. Yeah, anyways, that was a guess too, so I don't want to give that number out.
I did reach out to the Breeze to verify because we had mixed numbers on their number of rooms, and the owner responded that they would probably be fine with going to fractions again, 0.6 parking spots per room. That was just a general comment though, without, any sort of, she didn't reference any sort of data
Totally dirt.
or anything like that, but yeah, it doesn't sound like they're using 100% of their parking spaces for the hotel occupants.
It sounds like they're not monitoring their parking lot well, so that it's not strictly guests
Oh,
and
yeah, no.
restaurant people parking there.
Yeah, it never is.
One, you can't monitor restaurant goers either.
Right.
So, and so that is the only hotel that has a sizable restaurant and providing ample parking.
Right. I'm glad
That's why we like
glad
going
they do.
to the Breeze, is because we know to just dinner, we can park in the back and there's going to be
Yeah.
spots available, so.
Right. Yeah. As you should be able to.
Got John.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I think P&Z doesn't promote development, but I think it also should be promoting what everyone, majority, is wanting is development. On that point, I've seen Fifth, like Carol said, it was plugged up. I've seen Fifth plugged up when Edgewater's not even open for business. So how is it the hotel people? That's just me saying it. So it can't be the hotel people if the hotel's not even open up and Fifth Avenue is plugged up. In the caveat Breeze Inn, that area is full, whether it's hotel season or not hotel season. That has so much other businesses going on around it. I wouldn't use that as my hotel parking lot metering. I would gladly use Harbor View. I would gladly use Edgewater. I'd use Harbor 360 even though that's a very busy area. Gateway. But I think it'll all balance out when we add in Windsong. They're fully booked. There's no cars out there. There's none. I think it'll weigh in and even out and delete Breeze Inn. Breeze Inn, everyone knows how busy it is there. It has all the other businesses. But I would also say that it's not no data. These are just, like Brendan said, these are just round numbers. This is just, we just chose one car per unit. Well, nobody did a study, but we have had hotel owners take a guess. We've had hotel owners vouch for how much they have. I can tell you right now, in my hotel, I bet you we're at 50%, 60%, and mine has no other business around it. No one's parking there for free for dinner. It's all alone. We've actually put in concrete parking pads so you can clearly see our occupancy levels. And I can also say this, successfully, my nieces have started a summer rides program. And they make a shit ton of money giving rides from our hotel into town. Not because it's cheap, it's $20 one way. But it's because people are staying at an out-of-town hotel with no car. No car. Imagine if they knew that they could stay in town and use the free transit system. I guess my whole point is, with just that little bit, one space per unit is so arbitrary, it's unreal. And I don't think it would be, I mean, we've heard from Tom, he owns by far the most in very congested areas. And there is zero foul in reimbursing someone for them paying for a parking spot. That's a harmless crime to anyone. I mean, like, I don't see how that could ever be used as, because my point is, if it wasn't there, then they would go use the free parking. So we shouldn't use that as a derogatory statement towards, well, they need to provide parking, because what if that wasn't there? Well, then they use that. But there's a reason why in, I think it's 19 or 20 years, that's never been used. But yeah, that's my point. There's plenty of data, and it's definitely not one per unit.
I think these codes have already been, a lot of this was written long before we had an awful lot of cruise ships and other things going in.
Oh,
So
yeah.
I think it's reflective of an older, regulation, and so it just needs to be updated.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, but I don't even know if you have to necessarily do a study on it. I mean, like,
No.
yeah.
I'd just like to clarify, I did not mean to be derogatory to Tom reimbursing his guests, but for example, if we didn't have a convenient city paid parking lot right there, then his guests would have to use what code has required him to provide. And his point was, nobody's using what code has required him to provide because the city parking lot is so convenient. Not every hotel has a convenient city paid parking lot nearby, especially downtown. So it just seems to skew the data, was my point. So it's very nice to have a large city paid parking lot.
Well, I think with that, then why don't we just release them now of that? If it's such a benefit, then like, why can't we just release and know that, common sense, that he doesn't need to pay 20 grand this year or next year? I mean, like,
That's what we're
if there's not a
discussing.
bad reason for it, and it's not a negative, and it is convenient, the city has it there, it's being provided, then why are we forcing this poor guy to pay that out there? Just because he can afford it, because he can?
There's a reason that hotels and motels have a conditional use permit in certain zones, including Harbor Commercial. They attract a lot of guests, and their impact is larger than perhaps a little, t-shirt shop next door. But the t-shirt shop has an equal right to park in the parking lot, and if it's overwhelmed by bigger businesses, then where do people park? So I do think it's important to consider how many, we need that data, how many guests need parking for the services that you're offering, and we're just taking a guess. Go ahead, Claire.
Oh, no, I didn't think.
Oh, okay.
No, actually, it was Brennan who was having something to say.
It's all finger.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Brendan.
I just wanted to say a couple things about Seward. I mean, I hear over and over that we're a special case, and sure, we are in some ways, but for parking, we're really not. Study after study has shown anywhere that has eliminated parking minimum requirements has done so on a kind of a neighborhood level for charging. So when you get to a neighborhood level, you're talking about Seward, basically. And so this size of an area isn't anything that's hasn't been done or is forging new ground. It's all there, paying for parking. We're worried about spillover. Well, you just, again, you charge more. Like you look, it's all been implemented. Like there are methods to deal with this. There's been studies on this. In fact, like there's a lot of like just broken down cars parked in our right of way right now, but there's nothing stopping them from like getting moved on, and this is the kind of thing that will do that. It'll actually, you might even make things look better around here. The money we collect from paid parking can be put right back into a neighborhood locally right there, you know, landscaping, that kind of thing, lighting, sidewalks. Like we're giving away like so much by not charging anything. So I think eliminating free parking, or eliminating, free parking and, you know, slashing these minimum parking requirements would do a lot. And ironically, like the best data we would have would be from paid parking, because you'll know, they're gonna have a receipt for that. All these hotels are guessing and giving numbers. They don't have the real data, because they don't, why would they? They're not tracking, like, if it's free, why bother tracking it? So, yeah, I think, you know, we're worried about Fifth being plugged up, and again, you choose the right rate to charge to park on Fifth, and it won't be plugged up. Like, that's just how economics works. So, I encourage anybody on the commission to read, like, the books that we've, or any data or book that's been written on parking, and you'll kind of see the same conclusion from study after study, where it's been implemented. And sure, there are growing pains, just like anything, but the overall success stories from them all are, more development and actually less traffic. You know, we're a car-based society because we require parking for everything. Like, we can start to change that tide. We don't have to be a car society forever. You know, we can still keep cars, but we don't have to require a car ownership to do anything. So, I think, like, this is a really good step we could take to a better future.
So how do you recommend we proceed? Because Title 11 is not our purview.
Right, it's not our purview, but this is, and so we throw this out there, we throw it out there, not our problem. It's up to, like, yes, we give them, hey, you're gonna need a charge for parking, we pass it on, you know, the city does. Like, but it's not our job. Our job is just the parking part. You know, parking minimums, we can slash them. Then it gets passed off to somebody else. It's not our responsibility. Yes, it's gonna require another department to do some work, but.
So could I ask you your thoughts on hotels and motels, our current topic? What would you like to slash that to?
Well, you know where I'm going with this. So you know where I'm going with
I
this.
feel we have to move on, and I'm willing to listen to slashing parking.
All right, well, I think we should, I mean, if we're gonna slash them for that, we should slash them for everything, though.
I know, so either we stop right now and wait till we have paid parking code in place.
Why do we have that in place?
When they go like this.
Here's the big political move would be, you all vote in Title 15 to get rid of parking minimums. It's just a recommendation, it goes to council, it would not pass right away, right? But it would plant the seed, it would start the conversation, and part of that conversation would be, well, if we did go that route, what would need to happen throughout town, throughout the other parking regulations? And so, that would be the big move that this commission could take.
Or not.
Or not.
Well, we know we can't leave it as it is. We really can't leave it as it is, because we know we're building stagnation. So we're gonna have to decide, you know, are we going to do it? We can't come up with any numbers, as, you know, everybody out here is saying, everybody's got a different opinion. You know, do you slash everything to 50% and then throw, you know, punt it down to the council, maybe they'll do it, and then they'll put the thing in for the parking, the paid parking? I don't know if that's the fairness thing, but I am also concerned if we go to nothing, and if somebody puts a building on a, you know, commercial piece of property as a hotel with absolutely no anything, then what do you do? But there has to be enough parking. It can be paid parking, but there's got to be enough spots for everybody somehow. You know, I'm from New York. I know how you know, I know paid parking. I know parking, you know, parking, you know, big lots and stuff like this, and you know, it's just it can be a little chaotic. We're clearly not that here, but I just want to be sure that we're protecting, you know, the community, because you don't want these behemoth buildings out there. But I don't think any responsible developer would do it. If somebody's going to put something in, they're gonna make an allowance, as, well, I'm gonna put this in, I don't have any regulation as to how many parking lots in, but if I'm putting in one building here, or a duplex, or a triplex, or whatever it is, and put the thing in there, of course, somebody's gonna have a car, so they may just invariably put something in there for themselves, for that each unit, and then if there's paid parking out there, then people decide whether they wanna pay for the parking out there either. Or there may be some residential parking permit for folks that can park there. But free parking is what's killing us. And we also have all those derelict vehicles, whether it's Fifth Avenue or wherever, they're all over the place, and they're taking up a lot of space on the road.
That's another title, where abandonment of vehicles.
Oh, totally, yeah.
So that's a matter of enforcement. We do have code that would address that.
Oh, we would,
They could
too.
They could be towed.
Yeah.
But there's,
I'd just like to point out again that our lot maximums will leave space on all those lots except for commercial, and even auto commercial, that's lot maximums, right?
Yeah.
So these lot maximums will leave space on the properties for parking.
Yeah, they would, and that's what the developer would probably work with, and
Yeah.
put stuff there, because the building can only be so big.
Yeah, what's the onus on that developer?
Yeah.
So it's now almost 8 o'clock. I would like to move on, even though we're not resolving much except a desire to have discussion about Title 11, paid parking. Do you want to keep going through this worksheet? Is it beneficial or not?
Well,
Because
we're
if
gonna
it just keeps going back
Make a
to,
conclusion?
we don't know, let's slash it, let's
Was there a
get
bit,
paid.
was there a bit about backing out onto the,
There's much more to cover, is my
Okay,
question,
yeah.
how you want to deal with your time.
Well, a lot of times, it's sort of like, I think it's a domino effect, because if we have a decision on one thing, or we don't have a decision, then it's invariably not going to be, we can't have discussions on the other ones
Right.
too well. Granted, paid parking is the thing for another department, but we should eventually have a discussion with them, with the fact that, if that went that way, what would be the fallout from it, and could we actually work with it in terms of whether the building and the rest, could they even absorb that if we slashed parking, on all our, on all the different development things? Could that even be absorbed by them? I don't know. As far as that goes in, could they reasonably put vehicles and stuff out there and demand not vehicles, but have the parking spaces there and then have the paid parking there out on the street? But given what our limits are on the property itself to build, it might not be a problem at all.
Okay. Can we go to marine-related uses? I hope this is an easier one. So under marine-related uses on page 6, it says harbor or marina, and we don't use that term in Seward, marina, so I'd like to strike that. It says 1 parking space for every 2 established boat stalls or equivalent berths based on an average boat length of 40 feet, and if a launch ramp is included, a minimum of 20% of the spaces will be long enough to accommodate vehicles with boat trailers. I see no reason to have that in our code. So I would like to delete that.
Yeah, and the primary reason we highlighted that is because letter A at the beginning of the code says that Harbor Commercial District isn't required to provide parking, so we're not even sure why that's listed there. I guess for the industrial zoning district perhaps, but.
So you're saying delete that whole thing just altogether, which
I
is
would.
good, yeah?
It just seems like, what? So hopefully that's really easy. Okay, so we're gonna just delete that whole little entry. Then the next one is day cruises. I looked up how many charter boat operators are licensed for 20 or more people, and I found 1 boat. So I would like to suggest that it just say day cruise for 20 or more people. And then I'd also like to, and in further support of that, most charter boats are 6-packs. Very few charter boats can handle 20 or more anglers. What's the difference between several 6-pack charter boats and 1 big one? So I delete the reference to charter boat operators.
I
Is that right?
Yeah, I don't. I
They
think
did
they're
not
about-
pop up in my research.
They're licensed, I think, as a water taxi company, but.
And do they provide parking off-site?
They are, no.
No.
They use the paved lot over on the north ramp.
Right. So it just seems, we haven't been enforcing this. I doubt that any of the charter boat companies provide, because you look where their office is and it's like Harbor Slip 3 or something. They don't really have a land presence where they would have parking.
And they're not
So,
required.
just
This is
delete
for the
it.
offices,
Yeah.
not for the boats.
Pardon?
This is for the offices, not for the boats. Like, 'cause
No,
we have.
like where would they have land to provide all this parking for their customers?
I thought this was for like those paid lots out there in front of the harbor. Like, that's where all those people park, for all the charters, all the day cruises.
That's the reality. They
Yeah.
use the city's paid parking lot, which I believe that's sort of what it's for.
So this could actually, it's not even a,
Yeah.
Are you saying
Get
just
rid of this.
strike all marine
Get rid of
related
this one.
uses?
I'd like to keep day cruise because that attracts a lot of people with vehicles. And that the evidence for me is KFT operates a very successful off-site parking lot. It's full all summer. Very successful regular shuttle as per code, back and forth.
Oh, across
So
the port.
instead of having those cars park in the city parking lot, this use that generates a lot of vehicles, they shouldn't be providing parking.
Oh, yeah, that's the one over across the, near Phoenix.
Right.
Yeah.
So I just strike charter boat operators license for 20 or more people.
Day cruise,
Strike
just leave
that.
it to day cruise, yeah.
But again, they're not required.
Yeah, and furthermore, they're not
Yeah, and so there's really no point to leave
Oh,
that
really?
language in there,
Okay.
because they're in the
Right.
Harbor Commercial Zoning District, and
Right.
so
So-
KFT has that lot that they use, but they don't
they're not
need to. So it's nice that they do.
Right,
That's just a courtesy, that's just they're being nice guys.
right.
So when they apply for it still, yeah, they're right, so there's nothing there, so
So
we go away.
even day cruises in the Harbor Commercial aren't required. Would they be required if it's in the code here? Does this make it required? This singling out that use?
No, it would just, because you can have a harbor or marina or marine-related uses in industrial zoning districts, so SMIC, cruise ship terminal, so then we would turn to this. But harbor commercial, any of these marine-related uses, our code doesn't require parking.
So if we kept day cruise, that would only cover day cruises that were in an industrial zone. That's really interesting. That may not be happening tomorrow. Huh. Well, I am really grateful to KFT for not
Yeah,
using the city parking lot.
that'd be a lot of crowds.
It would push out a lot of other
And it
users.
goes to Brennan's point, is they probably aren't doing it out of the kindness of their heart. They're doing it because they got so many complaints about parking that they're like, we have to supply parking for our customers.
Uh-huh.
And they're doing that in order to not have all the complaints, which kind of goes with like, parking will sort itself out.
So perhaps we don't even need the marine-related uses.
No.
Think so.
Okay, so let's just strike that whole category. Well, that was relatively easy.
Boom.
Okay, let's move on to E, which is our next, on the next page, which is page 7. E, location. So I provided a rewrite of that, and I added dual lots to this section, so that it, hopefully, if you agree, would read, subject to 1 and 2 of this subsection, all required parking shall be located on the lot occupied by the principal use served, or on the lot abutting the lot occupied by the principal use. And abutting means adjacent, it can also mean across the alley or across the street. 1, required parking may be provided on the lot that is not occupied or abutting the principal use, provided that there's a pedestrian route not longer than 600 feet to the lot occupied by the principal use, An example here is the Van Gilder Hotel, actually has a lot across the alley that is not abutting, but it's within 600 feet, and that's successful. Or 2, access is provided by a scheduled shuttle service or a valet parking attendant. And
I like the fact that you sort of bulletized it, sequentially like that
Right.
instead of sticking it in a paragraph, because that's hard to read sometimes.
The formatting is helpful,
Yeah.
clarity. So right now, we don't, KFT does provide this scheduled shuttle service, but they're not required to do that. And Edgewater's has been a failure because of free parking right in front.
Right in front of it.
But I would like to keep it in there. I think that it's an important way to provide parking if it's required. And then 3 would be required parking may be located on a lot not occupied by the principal use only if parking is in city limits. And we had an instance where maybe the shuttle went out of city limits, and that it's supposed to be on a lot in a zone and blah, 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 so that was completely off the charts for what the rest of the code says. So just to clarify, parking is in city limits. 2, parking is a permitted or conditional use in the zoning district for the lot. 3, the lot is made subject to recorded agreement among its owner, the owner of the lot occupied by the principal use, and the city, that the required parking will be maintained for the benefit of the principal use served for the life of that use. Or 2 or more buildings, this is the dual use of lots, which I think we need to encourage. 2 or more buildings or uses may collectively provide the required off-street parking, in which case the required number of parking spaces shall not be less than the sum of the requirements for the several individual uses computed separately. In the case of dual function or off-street parking, where operating hours of uses do not overlap, the Planning and Zoning Commission may, by conditional use permit, reduce the required parking to any amount that meets the requirements of each use. So, first of all, I'd like your opinion. Do you like that I combined dual lots? This is not any code rewrite, it's just reorganizing the sections of our code. Do you like that those are kind of all together, how you deal with location for parking?
I think so. I mean, it's wordy, but you have to be sometimes.
It's all the words,
Yeah.
same words, but just organized
But it's, yeah,
under
but
location.
locations,
That
yeah.
all dealt with location.
Because you're moving
And
that up.
it gives you more options under that category to think about. So then under those, under 2 subsection 4, we will probably have this discussion ad infinitum about the sum of the requirements for the individual uses computed separately. We found that when a hotel provides blah, 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 you don't need 100 parking spaces. So that needs, let me see, just a second. 2 or more buildings or uses. Actually, that is not an example of this. 2 or more buildings or uses would be separate buildings or uses. So, for example, Uncle Fraser? Travis. He had an agreement with the dental clinic and that maybe the church, and they shared the dual lots, and we decided they didn't need all of what he would use and all what the dentist would use because they didn't overlap.
I try to remember where that was, because I thought that was
The
like
old
the old
Masons.
Masons building.
It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was an agreement that addressed the last paragraph of this. So by conditional use permit, you could have reduced parking, but it would still have to meet the requirements of each use. And I needed clarification on that, because that didn't make sense to me when I read it.
Which part?
What does that mean? By conditional use permit, the Planning and Zoning Commission can reduce the required parking to any amount that meets the requirements of each use. So if Travis needed, let's say, 15 spots and the dentist needed 15, but they used it dual, didn't conflict, would it be 15 for each?
That's the way I read it, especially given the language in letter K.
Right.
So they would still, so basically, the most restrictive requirement then would be that they would both have to provide 15 spaces if both of their uses requires 15 spaces. But then that caveat at the end would allow the commission to then reduce that total sum if they're sharing the parking spaces to whatever the total of just one of their uses would be.
Because it'd be, before it was, both of them had to have their own separate 15 and 15.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're working at separate hours, then you just have one set of 15 because they're overlapping.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I
I think
understood
that
that.
makes
yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
I think that's reasonable.
And I think we might have, I don't think we put it in the packet, but we did want to ask the commission if this would be something that the commission wants to review through a conditional use permit, or if that's something that we could change to like, community development staff may reduce the required parking if, and then, list
Just
that
seems like,
criteria of overlapping hours or whatever it may be.
Right.
Sounds like a good administrative move to me.
yeah, it
It does.
saves them the process of going and applying for,
Right.
Yeah.
so.
So it all boiled down to the same thing. You need 15, you need 15, together provide 15.
Because they'd have to come to us anyways to make sure it's
Right.
allowable,
Meets
and we'd give
requirements,
them
yeah.
the information to apply
Right.
versus just telling them
Right.
it's allowed, so.
And then if parking goes away, it won't be a problem anyway.
So in the case of dual function of off-street parking, where operating hours of uses do not overlap, the community development staff may,
Administratively determined.
yeah,
Yeah.
determine,
Suitable amount of parking spaces relative to the original CUP perhaps, or,
or we could just keep, may reduce required parking to any amount that meets the requirements of each use. Because they would still have to meet
Their-
code requirements. But it's like in that case, you each need 15. You
Yep.
don't share the parking lot, split it,
yeah,
15 years.
and they can do that.
Yeah,
Good.
that's good. That's a great suggestion. Okay, can we move on?
Yep.
So street access, this is underlined. And I put it, I suggest we move H, 4, and 5, which have to do with street access, up to G. And so we'd have 1, 2, 3, and 4 under there instead of under parking lots, because that really doesn't seem to relate to parking lots.
Right, because it's parking versus the parking lot.
Right. So that was just
Administrative.
administrative shift. But then, these are also highlighted. So I did a little research on all parking except that serving single-family and duplex residences shall be so arranged that ingress and egress are possible without backing over a sidewalk area, or onto a street of collector or larger designation. And it was a pretty common code because it's a safety issue. So I'm not sure why we would want to delete that. If you've got a sidewalk, you've got people walking down the sidewalk, you've got kids on bikes, you've got skateboards. So I think, I asked if there was any data on accidents from people getting injured from cars backing over a sidewalk. I don't know if there are. But it just
Yeah.
seems common sense that you would not want a place with a sidewalk or a busy collector street for cars to back into that danger zone.
Yeah, and I think this was highlighted not necessarily to delete, but just given the comments from the public at the last work session. I think the comments were, yeah, just referencing that cars parked on the street back up into the street, but to your point, they're not backing over or
Right.
across areas where pedestrians are.
Right. It was different, because if you look at downtown 4th Avenue, everyone's backing into the street, but it's not this. This is specifically over a sidewalk or into a busy collector street, which actually 4th Avenue is. But I thought the focus here was more on don't let people back over sidewalks. It's a dangerous thing. And then turning and maneuvering
Just one
space.
comment.
Go ahead. Oh, go ahead, Kelly.
In this area, this section, but not necessarily that one, yes, I don't think we should back over sidewalks. I would like it to be more clear or eliminate the having to have adequate maneuvering area on the property, at least on the alley side of properties. Like, it doesn't make sense to me that you have to have areas on your alley side to maneuver around to be able to park when you can back up into the alley, which is very rarely used. There's not a lot of traffic back there. This is at G at the beginning.
Do you see it under H4, where it talks
No,
about?
under G right now. All off-street parking facilities shall be designed with appropriate means of access to the street, alley, or other right-of-way, that's fine. And will have adequate maneuvering area. That may make sense on the street side of buildings, but it doesn't make sense to me on the alley side, because you can have your 18 feet parking spot and back into an alley that's rarely used and get out of your spot. But like making, for example, my 30 by 100 lot use more than 18 feet for the parking spots just to back into the alley, like so that I can maneuver on my 3,000 square foot lot to get into an alleyway. Like, that just makes it more difficult for development.
So under H,
Under G.
yeah, but look under H5, it says that turning and maneuvering space, except that which serves single-family and duplex residences, shall be located entirely on the private property, provided that the usable portion of an alley may be credited as aisle space subject to safety approval by the city engineer or police chief.
Do we need the engineer to spend his time going through whether or not people
Well,
back into the alley?
We don't have one.
Yeah.
No,
But-
No, just on the alley side, like,
Yeah.
the street makes sense, like, you don't wanna have somebody backing into third, maybe, I don't know. I don't know that it matters that way either, but on the alley side, like, people are slowly backing out, there's not a lot of traffic involving
So if it was
an
changed to,
engineer that we don't have seems very tedious.
well, this was when we had one, we don't have one anymore. Provided that the usable portion of an alley may be credited as maneuvering or aisle space?
That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay. Let you be maneuvering in the alley. But you would like, under G, as it stands, G, second line, you would like to strike and will have adequate maneuvering area?
At least on the alley side, but in general, I don't think you need it, but I would like it to be more clear.
Uh-huh. Agreed. Any suggestions on how to clarify that? Some people only have access to the alley.
Right.
And unfortunately, more of our alleys are being used as the only primary access for new developments. Primary.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with people backing into it or anything else like this. I think my biggest concern with the alleys is people that put buildings so close to the alley, and you have to have you're having a real tough time backing out, and especially if you got a big truck or something like this, then you're doing a lot of, maneuvering just
Right.
to try to get you out of your own,
Right.
property.
It's only 20 feet wide, and then it's even less than that,
Yeah, and then you have snow.
Yeah, and then you have snow. Okay, right at this minute, I can't think of how to do that, but I'd like to highlight it for consideration.
I don't know if I'd have the police chief do that. I think maybe public works guys or something like this for moving? Because you also have to access things with, just to get in the alley with local vehicles. They might have a better idea, you know, the police chief.
Can we say city staff?
Yeah, that'll be helpful, yeah.
Yeah, okay, by city staff.
I don't know exactly who's the smart, who'd be the
Right.
best one.
I chose police chief because he's responsible for vehicles and parking enforcement. Okay, we'll have to consider those comments and figure out how to allow the alley to be used for maneuvering and in and out. Okay. Reduction of spaces, this is under K, which is on page 8. So, I think everyone that's read this has found it very confusing, and the attorney was requested to give his thoughts. So I basically took his wording and reorganized it. So any development with a lower parking requirement that was approved before ordinance 2018-004 can continue to exist as a non-conforming use pursuant to this title. A variance application cannot reduce the parking requirements below what this title provides. And he said if the applicant cannot comply with the parking requirements, then the applicant needs to reduce the size of the development, change to a less demanding parking use, or find another solution. And that would not be in the code. I just wanted to give his reasons for that. 3, an applicant may apply to reduce or relinquish parking requirements only under the following conditions. A, if the previously approved requirements are greater than what is currently required, or B, if the current land use was changed to a lower parking requirement. That would greatly simplify the understanding of K.
I think it cleans it up a little bit. I also think I like that if the current land use was changed to a lower parking requirement, that gives you some options, because if we choose to reduce the parking
Correct.
stuff.
It's
you don't have to
exactly where
change
that
one.
would slide in.
Yeah.
Did he even need number 1? Because isn't that how code exists anyway?
Well, because that addresses a lot of non-conforming uses, and they can continue to be a non-conforming use under all that.
True of all of our code.
That's what, yeah. That's sort of like the grandfather thing.
Yeah.
Going,
We
yeah.
know
Right.
say that.
Well,
So-
I just wanted to,
Yeah.
it was in there,
But
yeah, just
so that's
to make sure it's clear. And there's the cutoff date, he researched it and found that was a date that the new parking requirements were put into effect. So anyone before then, they can just continue until the nonconformity is addressed. Can we move on to group use of lots?
Sure.
Okay, this is under P, same page. Where more than one tenant or use is included within any one building, so this would be like a restaurant or a shopping mall, on any one lot, the parking requirements shall be the sum total of the parking requirements for all of the various tenants or uses provided. However, that the aggregation of tenants or uses shall meet all the requirements within the definition of a mixed occupancy building, shopping center, hotel, or motel, in order to become entitled to utilize the parking ratio specified in section 1510-21-5B, which we have not clarified very much. But, so let's say we slash it to 0.5, so they would have to meet those parking ratios, 0.5. So the big thing here is, it only said shopping center, which I thought was a funny thing to include because we don't really have any shopping centers, except Safeway maybe. But I added that new definition, mixed occupancy building and hotel motel, because those are examples of an aggregation of tenants or uses. And then 2, where a hotel, motel, lodge, or inn has other principal uses such as restaurants, bar, meeting rooms located on its premises, the principal use requiring the greatest amount of parking shall provide 100% of the required parking spaces, and the other uses shall provide in addition at least, and I underlined 70% for discussion, of the parking spaces which would be required if there were standalone uses. So in John's hotel case, he needed about 100 additional parking spaces because he had, as a typical hotel does, a restaurant and a bar and meeting rooms. And we found that that was incredible.
A little excessive, yeah.
Right. So again, this says 70%, that's what our current code says, and I don't know if we can come to an agreement on that, but I'd like to highlight it, that 70% figure needs to be thought about.
Well, the other thing too is a lot of this, presupposes that every hotel room's taken up and every seat in the restaurant or whatever is taken up, and it's never that way. I mean,
Right.
maybe during polar bear or something.
And a hotel guest is using the bar and the restaurant and the
Yeah.
meeting room, so you don't need
Oh, yes.
70% of that duplicating.
Yeah, generally speaking, most people, other than the Breeze Inn, the restaurant, but a lot of places are using, if they're at the hotel, it's got running something, then it's you're not gonna have people coming off the street and going into the restaurant or the bar necessarily, so
Right.
it's, yeah.
Right. Would you like to speak to that, John?
I would. I think we've had testimony that, Tom designed the place and the use of it is for one-offs and typically would never need that amount of parking if it was required for, but in my case, I think the exact same scenario. I don't think I should have to have 70%. I think it should be 0. It's a one-off, and I guess if it wasn't, what if that was space for lease? What if the restaurant wasn't operated by the hotel, but it's just office space for lease? It's a vanilla shell. It could be anything. Then what? No parking required. Another business can come in, do a outright business that doesn't require any parking, right? Restaurant, cafe, so to make it fair, it's all operating on, so why have something in there that one establishment has to have 70%, when if you just put in your application a different way, have a different LLC, you would need none.
So you're suggesting we strike, and the other uses shall provide in addition at least 70%, just strike that.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
What do you think? Does that seem fair?
I think it seems fair considering my thought process is that you're not gonna have very limited times you can have a full hotel, full restaurant, and a full bar, and even if you do, a major portion of those people are going to be hotel occupants. My thoughts, yeah.
Okay. Let's strike that. Okay, moving on to add to definitions, which is under 1510-140, 31H, and renumber. The definition, mixed occupancy buildings, a structure that contains both residential and commercial uses. And that's straight out of the International Building Code, which is what you want to build.
Nice.
Okay.
I would love to see the changes to the code, and this is not necessarily the parking, that's for the uses, because right now, commercial buildings in commercial zone, or central business district, you can only outright build a commercial building on the lower floor with one apartment, and anything above that, you have to get a conditional use permit for. And if you look at all of Ford, all of those buildings are commercial spaces on the bottom, and they have 4 to 6 apartments, most of them. There's a handful of them that have 1 or 2. Most of them have 4 to 6 apartments. they all should be brought into compliance. If that's the look, which it sounds like everybody likes the look of Forest, with all the buildings right next to each other and the commercial spaces on the bottom and, not lodging, housing above, then I would like there to be just like an outright use for central business district to have 4 to 6 apartments, somewhere in that number, with no parking requirements, much like most of those buildings do not have any parking. And then mixed commercial buildings on any other zone that doesn't have 100% building maximums would have space on their, like, you need to split this into 2 because it's two different things.
Split it in 2 on the land uses allowed table.
Yeah, there needs to be one for any zones that allow 100% building.
So
which
harbor
just-
commercial and central business.
Is it just those 2? So those 2, I would propose not having any parking requirements for up to 5, 6 apartments above. And then mixed-use commercial buildings like that are allowed in other zones, which I think is only office residential.
Yes, so for a commercial building with 2 or more apartments, they're allowed an office residential, auto commercial outright, and then conditional use permit in harbor commercial and central business.
So I feel like you'd have a different thing for that, maybe, I don't know if it's a thing. I would say do something, bring everybody back into compliance, because that's what's already happened. All those buildings exist already with multiple apartments on top and no parking.
I noticed, researching this as well, that many of those apartments in downtown 4th Avenue are short-term rentals.
But then they have to provide parking plans to get their permit, so they're either renting illegally or they have parking somewhere for their
Right,
short-term
and they
rentals.
say, limited parking, but you can park along the alley, which of course is not allowed. And they recommend parking in the free parking again, it loops over there. So it's like enforcement is lacking. If they initially were required to provide parking, they don't advertise that now. It's just
Which
not
one,
happening.
Brown and Hawkins do they still have short-term parking up there?
They have parking in the back.
Okay, so they provide parking. The Ale House provides parking for all of their nightly rentals up there. Like, I don't know which ones you're talking about, that are short-term rentals that are not providing
Right,
parking.
I don't know if I want to call them out, but
Yeah.
just to say, I did find some,
Sourdough
they're not
has parking in the
all,
back.
yeah, they're not all long-term housing. They seem to be mostly short-term rentals, which are allowed downtown, commercial business. And if they did have a CUP for parking and a parking plan, it's no longer happening.
The ones that I'm thinking of all provide parking, and there's only one that I'm unsure of.
Yeah. Well, just know that there's at least one that exists that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So
But the
we don't want
majority of
to,
those buildings
we don't
are
want to
like-
encourage parking in the alley. Or
No, not at all.
Yeah, but they're welcome to use our free parking, because that's what we have right now.
I guess I didn't really get on that. So do we have any amount of parking that we're suggesting for this?
This is a brand-new definition tonight to address situations that exist and future projects that exist, and we still have to determine the first step. We've got a definition, it goes in the definitions of the code, and then we address it in the land uses allowed table, where it would go, and under parking. So it's brand new and should have been done 10 years ago.
Right.
As to what
Yeah.
is allowed.
Right, so we're in the process of trying to make this happen and make it clear. Then the last one, other accessible parking requirements. It says all parking shall comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the reason it's not more explicit is that the code does change, it's updated, and we didn't want to be locked into code that was no longer current. So I just thought, this is just a note, a handout would be helpful for the applicants. And I printed this out with diagrams and stuff, but I've just noticed as we go through these CUPs and wherever we have to say, you know, this, they go, oh, you know, I didn't know you had to have it. But it is a goal, I think, of council to address this. Gosh, how old is this act? 1992? We're still out of compliance in most parking lots. So I just wanted to provide that focus that we really need to take care of our
Since I'm not aware,
accessibility.
since I'm not aware that they have to be wider parking spaces, that'll affect a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of people not compliant.
Yeah.
I'm looking up what the space is required.
Right,
Yeah, but I'll look into that and see if there's something, because, yeah.
yeah, really good. Okay, we made a little bit of progress, I appreciate that. So the rest of our handout is on, the next is a harbor supplemental information. On page 10 is a harbor parking analysis and a clarification. The south boat launch, about 3/4 of the way down, the actual name for that parking lot only has 40 spaces. It used to be a permit parking lot for employees, but now it's just apparently parking. And the South Uplands has 100 spaces, and that's where the RVs and boats are encouraged to park. So there's 675 spaces, and there's varying days for maximum stay, and you can get all that information off the harbor website. They have a nice little chart there. So it varies from 3-day maximum to up to 14 days in the Northeast boat launch. So that's just good stuff to know. I like to see a downtown parking analysis, especially if we're moving towards providing paid parking. It'd be nice to know a downtown parking analysis similar to this.
How many slots there are and stuff like that, yeah.
Yeah. So we
Because,
know.
yeah, but it would be interesting for hypothetical revenue on paid parking
Right.
for all the stuff.
And I remember when harbor parking was free and the city was really divided. He said, oh, you know, people are going to really feel we're unfriendly if we charge them for parking. And there was a lot of, and same with downtown, oh, you know, they're going to think we're really unfriendly if we charge parking. But over the years, people expect to pay. And so it's become a non-issue. So I don't have to worry about that too much. But it was, you know, tempest in a teapot and Seward, like, oh, well, people think they won't come, they won't love us anymore. So anyway, that revenue is greatly appreciated. And then on page 12 is hotel parking, which we've already discussed quite a bit.
Those required parkings that vary, were they the ones with the .78, .82, and the .5, those guys are there, those went in a long time ago. Did they do it with the variance, or did they, I mean, you're not supposed to, but how did they get those?
It was done with the CUP,
They did?
yeah, and if you notice there, in the zoning districts where no parking was required, so harbor commercial, central business, and so that may have been the reasoning there, where the commission was going off of like, okay, well, 0 parking is required in these districts, and then they came up with a number on their own versus defaulting to what was required in code for other zoning districts.
Oh.
That's the best explanation I can come.
And hotels, motels, lodges, and inns need a CUP.
Yeah.
So that's how that came about. And then the correction is Van Gilder does provide parking on a lot across the alley. So I appreciate this. It's
a good
real
telling.
interest. It's hard sometimes to find out how many rooms a hotel has. They don't actually say that a lot of times on their rooms. There's some pretty big ones and there's some small ones. There's also, I noticed a Swan Nest Inn is there. It actually has 5 rooms, according to their website. And it says 6 on site, but.
Do they have employee parking? Swan Nest?
This doesn't differentiate who gets to park in the number of spaces. It just says this many sites. It doesn't say if it's guests or employees.
I guess my point would be 5 would make it commercial, right?
Like versus a short-term rental versus
Yeah.
a hotel. Yeah, I think it is. If they are over 5, then it's a hotel.
Oh, it's over 5?
Mhm.
Okay.
Do you remember how you got the number of rooms for a Swan Nest Inn?
So I think what the confusion is there, they have a manager room on site. So
I see.
So yeah, they probably do have only 5
Okay.
hotel rooms and then the manager room.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be subject to the same conditions as the other ones? We have more than 5. And at Tides Inn, I noticed they did have some sites on the north side of the building, but it's probably in the public right of way. They're just parking as if it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Free parking on our public right of way, which is allowed. Any comments about these worksheets?
No, it's good. That's great summaries on these.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate that work. Alrighty, that brings us to, any further comments from staff?
Not on this topic. I just want, are we done talking?
We're getting ready to wrap up. If you'd like some parting comments.
Just to, as I sent out an email, we do not have this room for the July 1st meeting, and so I threw out the option of rescheduling to the 8th, but there are other options. We could relocate for that meeting, or just reschedule it for a week later, or potentially just do a double header for the 15th, which is the work session date.
Was the library available for the 1st?
It is available for the 1st.
I personally would prefer just to do it on our assigned date, because that's what I've set aside for P&Z.
Okay.
Double headers are hard. Are the rest of you available to meet at the library on July 1st?
July 1st, yeah.
Okay, can we just do it then?
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments from the commission before we close?
No, I think we sort of hammered this out as much as we could with not a whole lot of solutions, but we're kicking it down the road a little bit. I think a lot of people have understand that, I think we're looking at the parking, we want to be able to reduce it some, certainly, but to find that sweet spot, complete or 50% or whatever, I guess that's the thing, is I'm not comfortable just acting it all the way to nothing until I understand more. And I think that's where the parking, on the street parking and the pay, or the paid parking would be part of the solution.
Any final comments from the audience? Go ahead, John.
I'll keep it quick. So I got to do a personal run, take off, and run out to my place. Got 21 cars. You can go on our website. We're fully sold out today. Do the math. It's around 40%. On the way back in, I got to count Harborview. Got about 6 cars out there. I even counted the Pathfinder and the van that's always there in the 6. And I believe that I'm sure they're very high on occupancy, just like everyone else. I guess with closing, that's real data. And I don't think anyone would say that a out-of-town establishment like ours, which is, we say it on the website, we're out of city limits, we're out of town, is necessarily booking us more than someone that would promote an in-town with no parking, or limited parking. And that's just my data, and that I got to grab right away and share. I do like everything that's being talked about and pushing around. I guess My only thing I take from it is that, yeah, they're non-conforming, or how did they ever get through? They are a benefit, the hotels that went in. They promoted business for all the t-shirt shops. They all need those people. It absolutely benefits. I think the only thing that doesn't benefit, and again, it doesn't matter, they're really rich, but why these poor people are holding on to a very valuable lot or paying 20 grand a year. Waste, lots of waste. But anyways, I think it's moving in the right direction. There's real data. I think you could make a move on multiple things, not just hotels, because I'm interested, and get, fire off some development. I've been here 8 years. I've got close to $750,000 invested downtown. I have nothing built. That's some real data. Put my money where my mouth is, bought, have really worked and tried, and it's more positive than when I started, but it's definitely not there. And if me as a builder is struggling this much, I could only imagine why I've seen very good lots, people with a lot more money kind of give up and not develop in Seward. It's just, good thing I have something else to do outside of city limits.
Could you tell me, you had 25 cars at your lodge?
Yeah, if you went out there, I would say 21, 22,
Okay.
but if you counted my cars, it's probably 25.
And then, what was your recommended percentage? Or,
what did we say, 50%?
is that what you said, 50%?
I would be happy with 50%. I think it should be lower, but for an in-town place.
Okay, thank you. Our next meeting is July 1st here. I will now adjourn this meeting at 8:41.
library.
At the library,
Library.
not here.
At the library.
At the library?
Yep.
All right, thank you. Our next meeting is July 1st at the library at 7 p.m. I will now adjourn this meeting at 8:42 p.m. And thank you everyone for your participation.